Hello, everybody, and welcome to another amazing week of The Next Issue. I'm your host, The Power Trip. Before I get into what we're going over this week, give me a minute. I think it's starting to storm outside. I need to actually make sure my windows are shut and stuff. I don't know if anybody else has seen some of these crazy storms out there. There's some red lightning going on, and I don't know, but give me one moment. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. I had to shut the windows. There's some kind of disturbance going on outside. I'm not sure what, but anyway, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Culture Cache and to our debut issue of The Next Issue. I'm your host that's called The Power Trip. I'm sorry, it's my first time doing this, and we're going to be starting off this with a series of things going over reboots. And, it's a pretty big thing to go over, so we're going to actually be breaking this up over the next 4 weeks and some articles and videos, and I'm going to actually break things up between articles and videos. The articles you can consider like a tie-in issue, since this is going to be all about comic books. Or over time, you can also look at those articles as your annuals if you want, things like that. But we're over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be going over, like I said, the different types of rebooting. And for this week, this video, to start us off, we're actually going to be going over the definitions of reboots and some of the examples of those definitions. Now, to get things started, I'd like to cover the fact that, in my opinion, I don't think there's any formal definition of reboots, like a level 1, level 2. If there is, please feel free to, write in, let me know. But for right now, the only real things I know to go by are what we would consider a soft reboot and a hard reboot, kind of like what you do with your computer system. Since that's basically what almost happens to the comic book universe every time this happens. So we're going to be going in order from, say, soft to hard. And to start us off, to get this going, like I said, if I stumble a little bit, I apologize. It's my first time doing this. But thank you guys once again for joining us here at the Culture Cache and subscribing into the next issue. So to get it started, we're going to go over the different types of soft reboot. Now, a soft reboot can go anywhere from, just down to one particular character and their lives, their universe, if you will, to something that's broader range over the course of an entire universe, but still only a small thing. A really good example of a soft reboot is actually Spider-Man One More Day. Now, during the storyline that was going on called Civil War in the Marvel books, they had a point where they had superhero registration, and Peter Parker / Spider-Man had to register and basically give away his identity to the world. As anyone that has ever read a Spider-Man book would know, this is a pretty bad idea as far as Parker ideas go. And so this eventually led to Aunt May getting shot. After Peter goes through several different ways of trying to keep her alive, both magical and medical and everything in between, it basically comes down to Peter making a deal with Mephisto, Marvel's version of the devil. All Mephisto wants is to rewrite history to where Peter and Mary Jane never got married. There's a lot of political stuff behind this, and I don't mean political as in, Democrats, Republicans. I mean in the sense of the writers and whether or not they feel certain heroes need to be married for better stories to be written. But that's not what we're going into here. The point is when Mephisto did this, it gave Marvel a chance to rewrite Peter's history from a certain standpoint, basically from where he got married onwards. And so this allowed them to have the ability to write more stories both in the past and currently. He could have new girlfriends, he could actually have bumped into villains he never bumped into before, maybe certain story arcs that involved the two of them together didn't happen, maybe they happened in a different way. One major thing that came out of this is the fact that Harry Osborn was alive. Uh, I'm not going to go into details. I don't want to spoil anything for you on that particular note, but it did manage to bring Harry Osborn back to life. And in comic books, whereas dead doesn't always mean dead, at this point, Harry Osborn and Uncle Ben remained as two of the most prominent dead is dead arguments that most people would ever give. So this was a pretty big jump. Also, to kind of not backtrack too much for Marvel, they did later on uh, give a chance for Peter to unmask again, but this time instead of to the whole world, Peter ended up unmasking to the Avengers specifically. I believe they actually go into better in-depth story that I think Doctor Strange did some kind of a global mind wipe to keep Peter's unmasking away from the rest of the world, but specifically they made it to where they narrowed it down to only the superhero community knows Peter is Spider-Man and not everybody, including most of the supervillains. Now, another good example of, say, a soft reboot is the House of M. You'll notice a lot of these soft reboots are Marvel related. Marvel doesn't really believe they need to do a hard reboot, so they do a lot more multiple soft reboots to keep their stories fresh, as opposed to DC always hard rebooting a lot of the time. House of M did have a lot of reality warping in the storyline, but when all was said and done, everything got restored to normal to a fault. The only real things that got changed here was Hawkeye was brought back to life. Logan got his memories back. Neither one of those things are really major reboot worthy, but it did wipe out the majority of the mutant population. It took the number of mutants down from, I think, millions to 198, and that was it for the longest time. Another actually great example of a soft reboot is Marvel's Secret Invasion. This one didn't have to even do any reality warping. The Skrulls, an alien invading fleet, had actually revealed that they had been on Earth for many years because they can shapeshift. This gave Marvel the ability to reboot certain story arcs and plot lines in the sense of things that may have happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago to us, but, in the comic world, storylines from years ago, they could go, oh, that was a Skrull the entire time that happened. That wasn't actually really Spider-Man or Mr. Fantastic that did that. And it gave them a chance to kind of reboot their arcs and such and make it to where certain characters may not have been the bad guy or the good guy that you thought they were this whole time. And then one more good example of a soft reboot that I'm going to give is the newer storyline from Marvel called Axis. This one is a reboot in the sense of changing the character, the fundamentals of the character. In Axis, the Scarlet Witch and Doctor Doom get together and create a spell, an inversion spell, that basically, well, it does exactly what it says. It inverts a character so they're no longer morally good, now they're morally evil. It changes their alignment, if you will. This got used on many of the Marvel Universe characters, but by the end of it, the only characters that really kept it going, that stuck with it, were Sabretooth, who's now good, Iron Man, who is now the superior Iron Man. His was kind of a little bit more aimed to making him more like his movie counterpart, where in the comics he wasn't quite to that egotistical way. They were kind of bringing him back to his roots, where way back in the day, Tony used to be a lot more egotistical, I'm better than you. He's still a good guy at heart, but definitely a bit of a jerk in a lot of ways. And so now we have the superior Iron Man. There were a few other characters that got to keep the inversion as well. Not many. I believe Havoc was one of them, possibly the Scarlet Witch. But that it was more of a reboot of the character. These are all soft reboots because they don't affect everything. They don't change the fundamentals of the entire universe slash multiverse. Like I said, Marvel hasn't really had to worry about a hard reboot. They give their reasons, and we'll be going over more of the reasons of whether or not we as the readers feel someone needs to reboot in the next video. But I'm going to keep continuing on this video, giving you the definitions and examples of the different types of reboots. The next up is kind of jumping into the hard reboots, and you're going to notice a lot of these are DC, but to kind of get us started off, we're going to actually give an example of a hard reboot that's not the two major companies, and that is the Transformers and the Ninja Turtles. They themselves have had several different forms of reboots over time, but the reasons for them, for their hard reboots, are more of a combination of the time of just a large amount of time between books being written and jumping companies. Where Marvel used to be, or Transformers used to be Marvel, and Ninja Turtles used to be Archie. Now both are owned by IDW. And with such a big time gap in between a lot of story arcs, some writers no longer being around on the books, stuff like that, or working for the different companies, both books have had to reboot themselves into a whole nother format, another different story arc. The stories you may have read 10 years ago didn't happen in the current continuity. So they had a hard reboot where they had to start everything over again. Now, another good example of a hard reboot we're going to be going over in here is the Crisis on Infinite Earths. And this is usually your biggest example of a hard reboot. It's only recently been topped by what a hard reboot could maximize at. Crisis on Infinite Earths was DC's way of being able to reboot everything down to one universe. The multiverse for them had gotten way too big, way too convoluted, and so they came up with this big story arc to bring it all down to one universe. And that's pretty much what a hard reboot does. It basically takes everything you knew before, takes what they want from that, and creates something new by the end of it. So you didn't have a multiverse after Crisis on Infinite Earths. Everything restarted with just one universe. Later on, they touch on Zero Hour, which did the same thing as Crisis on Infinite Earths, but with the time stream instead of the multiverse, the parallel Earths. It did it with the time stream. It also kind of helped fix a few things that Crisis on Infinite Earths didn't really get a chance to fix and actually caused. You see, DC way back in the day had a little harder time kind of advertising, hey, these are the things that changed in the original Crisis, and so over time they've gotten a lot better about it. So Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, then you have in their books, like I believe Man of Steel kind of started giving you the examples of what changed for Superman and such. But then there was still that large time span between the two for Zero Hour to start fixing more of what happened at Crisis. But Zero Hour wasn't perfect either. It created its own issues there as well, but it still took everything down to one definitive timeline with the one definitive universe. So now DC had this is our continuity thing. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to go into the hows and whys, but I will mention this one thing. When you do something like this, it does make writing harder, because now you cannot break continuity, and because you don't have a parallel universe to touch on, or anything, or a parallel timeline to touch on with anything, you are very limited on the stories you can create, which is a lot of why later reboots happened at DC, was to give them that ability to write better stories and not be stuck with this one quote unquote, this is exactly how it happened no other way. Now, one of the reasons I'm mentioning this is because later on DC gave another good reboot, Infinite Crisis. This one brought the multiverse back. It still changed a lot of how things happened for the regular main DC universe. Now, Batman's killer was found, thus making his character a little lighter of a character, not quite as dark. Wonder Woman was now a founding member of the Justice League. Different things like that. It still changed the fundamentals of what happened in the main universe while giving DC their multiverse back to give them more options for writing stories and the like. Infinite Crisis also showed off their ability to learn from their past mistakes with the book 52. 52 spent a year, basically, the whole existence of this book gave you what happened with the changes of Infinite Crisis. What changed? Why did it change? That kind of thing. It actually gave you this, it's like an encyclopedia of knowledge for everything that happened due to Infinite Crisis happening. Something that the original Crisis didn't have, and thus that was one of the things that caused so much of a headache back then of, hey, we're down to this one universe, but then one writer would still write something different from another writer, and it would still cause a lot of issues. This actually gave basically a book, well, yeah, it was a book, but what I'm thinking is like an encyclopedia of, hey, these are the changes Infinite Crisis brought. This is kind of our Bible to go by from here on out. Now, some of the last good examples of a hard reboot I have is the biggest hard reboot ever done, really, for DC, and that is the Flashpoint Paradox, or Flashpoint books. This not only rebooted, it relaunched the main universe. Everything was different. Everything changed. Everything that happened before, I'll state this as when it happened. Everything that happened before never happened, as far as the main universe is concerned. The old reboots, the old crises still happen, but as mentioned in Flashpoint, Flash himself mentions that the things that are happening are affecting the main universe and overriding the main universe and its history. So with Flashpoint relaunching the entire new 52 DC universe, it overwrote everything we knew of the main universe ever. Period. And while I know that sounds a lot like what Crisis did as well, if you've read the New 52, you understand how big a deal this is. Everything has only occurred within a very small amount of time. Superman has only been operating, and the Justice League and superheroes in general have only been operating for about 5 years. Batman gets a little bit more leeway because he's been known more as an urban myth, an urban legend. No one's really seen him, so they kind of gave him a little bit more leeway. He could have been operating more like 7 to 10 years out, but people only know about superheroes for the last 5 years. That's it. Of course, now no relaunch isn't without its own things that it needs to fix up on. And thus, for the newest anniversary of Crisis on Infinite Earths, we have Convergence. Convergence, hand in hand with the book called Multiversity, is the last big reboot that has happened for DC, and the last big reboot, hard reboot we've had in a while. Convergence actually rebooted the reboots. I know at this point everyone should be facepalming. I did it myself. If you've read Convergence, I'm not going to go into too much detail here because it's a great story, but Convergence went back and made it to where none of the previous crises happened. None of the previous reboots happened. So it brought back the entire multiverse. Infinite Crisis brought back a specific, say, 52 universes. And in the Multiversity, if you read that book, you even get a reference to the original multiverse and then what's being called as Multiverse 2. Well, Convergence kind of brought back both, or brought back the original. So there's now an even bigger, it's now where Crisis on Infinite Earths, you now have those infinite Earths. It's not, you can go by the 52 Earths, and there is a map charting the 52 Earths, but realistically, feasibly, as a writer, they can very much go beyond that if they wanted to. You definitely want to go by the map they have, because that's their guidelines that DC's going to use for the new multiverse, but don't think that they're going to limit themselves to that if they need to go beyond those borders. They can. There's a reason there's still boundary around the multiverse. If you look at the map, you can see there's one last boundary out there protected by the highest of high deities that the DC universe has, but that doesn't mean there isn't anything beyond those borders. Now, the reason I reference the Multiversity is Multiversity actually, while it doesn't reboot, it does like 52 did with Crisis on Infinite Earths. It gives you an example of every one of the main 52 Earths in the current version of the multiverse. You'll notice a lot of things are different on the different Earths from beforehand. Convergence, at the very end of it, actually explains why. It's because you have the original multiverse, but it has evolved, and it shows that the main DC universe did evolve into what we have as the current DC universe. So that Batman the old Batman is our new Batman and such. The original Earth 2 Jay Garrick and those characters, their universe evolved into what you see as the current Earth 2 universe in the current DC multiverse. Now if you've been reading any newer books, there's going to be, I believe, some changes to that, but we'll see what happens later on. But right now, that's what we have right here. Is that is the hard reboots and the soft reboots we have. Once again, I apologize for my stumbling around. This is my first video I've ever done for this, so I very much appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this. I hope you all stick around. Thank you for joining us here at the Culture Cache. And like I said before, next week I'm doing an article to kind of elaborate more on everything that I can't elaborate here on the video. But I hope to see all of you from this day forward. Welcome, and next week welcome back. I'll see you again for the next issue.